This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Teri M Brown. You're an author,
I
and
am.
we're gonna talk to you about your life's work and your story. Welcome to the Van Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, everybody know that we've got your URL below www.terrymBrown.com. That will be fully clickable. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch at the moment. So in the description of the podcast, that URL will be clickable, so people will be able to click through that and then get to your work. Couple of things we like to get into before we get into the heart of the interview. We ask questions of every guest on the show. What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Oh, what motivates me? I've wanted to write for a long time and I didn't. And I felt like I shouldn't and couldn't and all of those things. And I'm now, I just had my 61st birthday. And there's something about getting to a particular age where you just say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I think what motivates me is I have a lot of stories in my head that these characters like are shoving to get out. And then when I do write and I hear what people have to say and they make a comment or they say, wow, that thought changed my life, or it changed the way I thought about things, or whatever, that's what motivates me. I figure if I can just touch one person with something I've written, then it was worth what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's kind of paying it forward. That's why I like to
Yeah.
do art, and even a podcast is like I like to give people a a forum for their voice.
Yeah.
And I think writers like you like writers and creative people. What I've noticed is like we're very observant about the world, and we can tell our story, but we also can tell other people's stories.
We
And
can.
and that's why I think our artists speak to people, because people find those things that we're able to express that maybe other people can't really put into words, but when they read it or they hear it or they see it,
They
then
feel
they're like,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that what made you want, like you said, you didn't feel like you had a permission structure to write until you got old enough to like say, "Hey,
No.
I'm gonna do it."
Yeah.
Was it something that you were always interested in?
As a kid, I said I wanted to be an author, but I also said I wanted to be a heart surgeon and an Olympic ice skater. So I'm not real sure that counts because, that's like a very wide range. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think by the time I went to college, I had put that idea really on hold because I had been told, you know, authors, that's like being a waiter or a waitress, like that's what you're going to do your whole life. And, if you're going to go to college, you need to go to college with like an actual career in mind,
Career.
whereas
Yeah.
writing wasn't considered that.
Well, it's like the
Um,
musician. They're like, "Oh,
yeah,
yeah, you
yeah,
really gotta
yeah,
do that. You're gonna be
yeah.
playing at the
And
pizza club
yeah,
house."
yeah, and you realize, people are like, you realize that you'll never make any money at it or whatever. And so I went a long time, and then life happened and I got married and I had children and I wasn't really looking to do anything. And then my kids started getting older and I started writing for small businesses, and I was writing mostly website content, little
Mhm.
ebooks, pamphlets that they needed. I found a lot of small businesses have really great ideas and a horrible way of getting it out there to the world. And so you would
Mhm.
go and look at these websites and think, wow,
I can do better
that's
than
never
that.
going to work, right? And so I started this in 2000, and you figured the internet was still a fairly new vehicle in
New thing,
2000.
yeah.
And so I was able to jump in and help these small businesses who were desperately trying to figure out what to do on the internet. And I started writing for them. And I loved that, but that to me isn't, it's creative to a point but not really. It's not my creation, it's their
Yeah, it's
ideas.
like
And
work
then
for hire.
yeah, and then I find a way to make their idea sound good. But I had characters really floating around in my head. At the time though, I was in a really bad relationship, and it was emotionally abusive. I didn't really have a place to any good place to land, so I
Mhm.
didn't want to put my own self out there too far, because if you do and then you fail, well, that's just one more failure on your head,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was like I
You
just
didn't
couldn't
wanna
do
deal with
that. No,
that.
no. But in 2017 I got out of that relationship, and immediately words started like just bubbling out of me. And I wrote my first manuscript. It's terrible. It will never see the light of day. But it showed me, first of all, that I had 50,000 words. And it was a real story. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It had characters. It had all of the things. It just wasn't done well, but you figure it'd be the same as an artist picking up a paintbrush for the first time and
your first
expecting
piece
a
is
masterpiece, right?
Yeah, like your first piece as an artist, if you're, typically, you're a musician,
paint over it.
When you're 14, 15, you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And your first piece of work, it might break through, but it's not going to be what you do when you're 25, 35, 45.
No. And so this was more, can I do it? And it took me several manuscripts before not only did I feel I could do it, but that I had given myself permission to let other people see it and to be something. Because, like I said, I lived in an abusive relationship for 14 years. And you don't just walk away from that and you're whole and healthy. It takes some time.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Well, the vulnerability, I mean, what I've seen is like an artist is like, we have to be willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you've got to build your courage up to be able to throw it at the world.
And be okay with what comes back at you. Yeah.
A lot of times if you're young, like you see with musicians, sometimes we're like, we don't know enough to be scared.
Yeah.
So you see a 17-year-old artist, they say, I'll just do it. But the older you get, the more hesitant you can get.
Because you start to recognize what the world can throw at you.
Yeah.
And you figure someone like me who'd been in this abusive relationship, the idea of like putting myself out there, that was terrifying because I'd already seen what the world can do. The world wasn't a very pretty place, right?
Lived through, not the best the world can give you. But a lot of times as an artist, it is your ability, like your talent is to synthesize those things.
Yeah.
And it be kind of like a cathartic exercise.
Yeah.
And even like your first book, you put it together, but it's like, it's a foundation. Like the foundation, it's like they say, it takes like 10,000 hours to be an athlete, doing that 3-point shot over and over until it becomes like I can hit it. Like 98% of the time I'm going to hit it. And so then once you learn that talent, then you start to, then it's a matter of like, are you scared?
Right.
Are you not feeling safe about putting it into the world? And that's kind of like a process.
Yeah. So for me, that process was really difficult. I had several manuscripts. I wasn't letting anyone look at them because I didn't feel like a real author. I don't know what a real author was supposed to feel like, but I wasn't. Yeah, but that wasn't what I was feeling. And I met my now husband. Was never getting married again, which could be like a whole podcast on its own. But I was never getting married again, but I met him and he tells everyone that he chased me until I caught him. So if you can figure that sentence out. And while we were dating, he said, I have always wanted to ride across the United States on a bicycle. Well, I had been wanting to do something big and adventurous. I wanted to prove to the world that I still had value. Little did I know what I needed to do was prove that to myself, but I thought that I needed to prove it to everyone else. And when he said that, I thought, ooh, that's an adventure. And then I thought, and I don't have to marry him to go on it, right? Like we could go on that kind of adventure together. And so I said, are you planning to talk about that for the rest of your life? Or are you really planning to do it? And he said, no, I really want to do it. And I said, count me in. So in 2020, at this point now, we had been married for a year. We rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C., 3,102 miles. And when I finished that ride, I thought, I just rode across the United States. Now, I'm not athletic. When Bruce and I met, I had not been on a bicycle in 40 years.
Wow, that's a lot
so
of work.
this was huge for me. Okay, this wasn't a tiny little son. This was huge for me. And when I finished, I thought, I can do anything. If I, Teri, can ride across the United States on a bicycle, I can do anything. What do I want to do? And I said, I want to be an author. And 14 months later, my first book was out. So I think that's part of, part of my story is I just finally got to that place where I recognized it's more of a mind over matter kind of thing. I
Yeah.
can do it if I want it.
Well, you found somebody that had that kind of drive. Like if you've
Yeah,
been around somebody that was like pushing you down and
exactly.
wasn't giving you inspiration,
Yeah,
the one thing about my family, my daughter, my wife, is like they are artists too, and they don't see limitations, and they
right.
don't see art as something like foo or so so it makes it really easy for me to do my artistic leanings to get into it
Right?
because I feel like I have support. Like if you had a family member to kind of giving you that look, is like you're doing that again. It's like what
Yeah.
are you doing on that keyboard again? Go out and
Why
mow the
are you
lawn.
wasting your time? Right.
Mow the
Well,
lawn.
what's really interesting is my husband is an engineer, and engineers are not really known for their uber creative, mushy side, right? I mean,
Yeah,
they're more facts and
logical.
everything.
Yeah,
But
logical.
but when it comes to me, he looks at me all the time and he says, "You can fly so high." He said, "Let's just see how high you can fly." I mean, that's what he looks at is wow, you're doing this great thing. I think he sees it as something he could never achieve.
Well, that's
He
cool.
does things that I can't do. He's got math capabilities that are so far beyond anything I could do. And yet he looks at what I do and he says, "Wow, I can write a 50-page like something about my engineering, whatever." He said, "But I could never create a character."
Well, that's awesome when you have
You know?
supportive like
Yeah.
spouse like that
Yeah.
that actually it's like it's not that it completes you, but they can see the differences and they don't like compete with it. They
Yeah.
actually encourage it.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
when you have somebody that's like not in a competition or like realizes like you can do things that they can't and they're supportive of those
And
things.
he's actually not even just supportive, but like super encouraging.
Well, that's even
He's
better.
the one that keeps saying things to me like, my first book when I wrote um Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, it was before we went across the United States. He's the one that pushed me to write it. He said, "The story that you have in your mind is so fantastic, you have to write it." And
Mm,
then when we finished that ride and I said, "I do want to be an author," he's the one that was saying, "Let's, who can you talk to? How do we get this out there for you?" I mean, he was the one who just kept saying, "Then do it."
mhm.
I want to see how high you can fly with this. So it's very different from the emotionally abusive relationship that I had been in. And then to have this, he teases with me and he says, "Yeah, but I don't have a really high bar," when I keep telling him how wonderful he is. And it's like, no, really, the difference is so astounding,
Mhm.
to have someone who like wants to see you succeed.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of like
Yeah.
predicting your failure, that's not
Right. Right.
very very helpful. But as a writer, the one thing I always like, well, there's a couple of things to get into because I'm a creative person as well, is like the world building. Like when people think about a song,
Right.
there's like the intro, there's the melody, there's the hook, there's the outro, there's all these pieces. And
Right.
you can have an outline. So when you go to build like your story, do you start with your characters? Do you start with your world? Or do you kind of start with dialogue? Or is each project different?
I think each project is a little different, but I'm more character driven. So characters show up in my head and I feel like they start whispering their story to me. So it usually starts with a character. It may even be an idea, but as soon as I start doing some kind of research on that idea, a character is in my
Pops up.
mind now.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like my latest book is Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. It's about healers in the 1890s, North Carolina mountains. It's called a granny woman, roots and herbs, a little bit of mountain magic. But that whole idea came to me because I had a wart on my thumb, which sounds like the most mundane thing in the world. But I had gone to my primary care doctor just for a regular old visit and said while I was in the office, "Hey, I have this wart. Can you freeze it off for me?" And she was like, "Oh no, we'll have to send you to a specialist." And I thought, "You've got to be kidding me." So I just went to CVS, got a little patch and that was the end of it. But a couple weeks later, I was chatting with my brother and I was just complaining about primary care, how it used to be that you'd go into the office and they'd do just about anything unless you were
you could
having
do.
unless you were having an active heart attack. I mean, they pretty
Yeah.
much dealt with you there in the office, and now they just farm you out. And so I'm telling him about this wart, and he said, well, why didn't you get someone to talk it off?
Talk it off. That's
I looked at him, I said, what?
what's that?
Right. And so he tells me, yeah, I got a buddy that talks off warts. Well, I didn't fall for it because I'm the person in the family that falls for everything. And then I hear about it every Christmas. Remember that time that Terry fell for the, so I just kind of, yeah. But as soon as we got off the phone, I had to look it up because I call myself a research junkie and I cannot let something like that go. Well, lo and behold, there are people who will talk to a wart and within the week it falls off. Some
Wow.
people buy them, like they'll give you a penny for your wart. And then it's crazy stuff. So now I'm doing even more research because I just have to know more about it. Well, there were people that could blow in your mouth and get rid of thrush. There were people who you could get a bad burn, and there are people who can talk the burn out of so that you end up with no scarring and whatnot. There are people who can talk to a baby who is breech and get them to flip.
Wow.
Just by what they're saying. And as I'm looking all of this stuff up, I ended up in the mountains of North Carolina with these women that are called granny women. And all of a sudden, Maggie was in my head.
Yeah, you came up with your character because that's
yeah.
how it happened. You synthesize stuff in the real world and then turn it
and then
into
all
your
of a
own
sudden
vision.
there's Maggie, and now she's telling me I have a story. And I was like, okay, well, let me write it.
Yeah,
So
it's just interesting those moments that you actually clicks and it's like, here's the idea.
here's the
Here's the
idea. And
character.
I
Here's
wasn't even, when I was doing all of that research, I wasn't thinking about a book. I
yeah,
wasn't doing the research because I thought, oh, this might make a cool book. I
you
was
got
doing it
pulled into
because,
it.
yeah, I get sucked down the rabbit hole all the time. There's just something about research that I love knowledge. I love learning things. And so it's like, oh, well, that's cool. And then
What gives
because
you the
that's
angle?
cool, it takes you to the next thing. And, before long, you're down in this, yeah.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing is like a creative person can like start looking through the lens. It's like a film director when they start saying, why did they choose these camera angles?
Right.
Why did they
Right.
choose the way that to film the scene? Right?
Yeah.
Do it in one shot, do it in multiple shots, do it like it's really perspective. And you're trying to kind of build that because when you read a story, you kind of see that camera,
Yeah.
right? And you're trying to get the reader to focus. And even as a songwriter, I'm trying to get people to focus like that as well. It's
Oh,
just for
yeah.
a shorter amount of time, maybe 4 or 5 minutes or 3 minutes versus, 80,000
But
words.
really, sometimes I think that the short form story, whether it's a song or a short story or flash fiction, is actually even more difficult. With a full novel, I have pages and pages and pages to get you to understand my character and my story. Right. And
Mm,
so I can go on and on. I can give you all this great background information. In a song, you only have a few minutes to catch
yeah,
my
some kind
attention
of
and
limitations.
to make me love this character. One of the things that I love to do is write flash fiction. And I actually love micro flash fiction, which there's
Mm,
one that I do that's 50 words or less. There's one that I do that's exactly 53 words. And I sit and I try to write a story in that amount of time. And I love that idea of synthesizing it down to its most basic element, but not so much so that now it's just boring. The dog ran. I mean,
yeah,
something that
yeah, you gotta
gives
have some
you
depth to it, yeah.
yeah. And I find that to be, I like doing that. I call it like my palate cleanser. So I'll be
Mm,
working on this big project, but it takes a long time to finish a big project. And I need something that feels like I've succeeded. And I'll
yeah,
stop
these
for a
short
while
bits.
and I'll go and do a little short something and say, oh, look at what I produced.
Yeah, it's kinda like when your song I could be building an album, and then I actually have a song that doesn't fit,
Yeah.
but it's kinda like it's a break,
Yeah.
and
Something
it
just to
might
go out and do
and it
something
kinda
else.
just gives me a way to kind of, like, get out of my narrow focus and then
Yeah.
kinda look and say, "Hey, should I be bringing some of these elements
Yeah.
into what I was doing?" And maybe I'll
Absolutely.
start choosing, like, maybe some of the things I was doing, it really should be more like this.
Yeah.
And so he starts giving you, like, different perspectives, kinda like when you walk away and you come back.
Exactly.
You
And
know,
I do a
and
lot of that in my writing as well. People ask me what my process is, and I tell them, well, the first thing I have is what I call word vomit, where I just sit down and let it out.
hmm
And I don't worry about how pretty it looks or if I've used the right words or, I just get the story out of my head and then
yeah,
I just
get
let it
down.
sit. I don't look at it for a couple of weeks and then I read it over again. And now I start taking some notes about things that I know I'm going to need to do to improve this story. And then I let it sit again. Then I take those notes and I make those improvements. And then now I'm really doing the
Yeah,
wordsmithing and the,
very much like in songwriting. A lot of times we'll just do like a rehearsal,
Mhm.
kind of just throw things down on tape for like an hour or two,
Yeah,
and then you go back and you pull the nuggets, and like in that 2 hours or an hour could be the hook,
right.
could be the intro, could be the outro. You start like, oh, like these
Oh,
are the
there it
things.
is. There it
There
is.
it
Yeah.
is, and then you're like, and then you're looking at different tapes. You take, oh, something from this tape is the intro, from this tape is the hook, and then it's like because you just build this big resource of
Yeah.
all this information, and you start to
Yeah.
synthesize it. Because sometimes things are not linear. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes as artists, we don't like it is all not coming together in one thing.
Oh,
Sometimes
yeah.
it's like bits and pieces over here and there.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, for me, I'm what they call a pantser. So there are plotters who sit down and they know exactly what they're going to do when they sit down to write because they've got it all figured out. They know what their beats are and they have all these terms. And then there are people like me that write by the seat of their pants. And I
Mhm.
just get this character in my head and I just start writing, which is why I call it word vomit. I just
Yeah,
literally
that
let it
flow
out.
state, kind of flow state stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, and I just, and sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't go anywhere.
yeah.
Sometimes it really was kind of, other people would see it as wasted effort, but I often will use something from that, even if it doesn't turn into a novel, it might turn into a short story.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just it's all yeah, I think it's all good to put things down
yeah,
'cause
yeah,
I
and
like I know a lot of people like in music, it's like, "Oh, man, I should have been rolling the tape." And so now we always roll the
always
tape
roll the tape. Yeah, just in
because
case. You never know
just in
what you might
case, because you
catch.
never know because "Oh, this mic's not good." But there's tons of examples where a vocal done on a mic that you didn't think was the right mic for the actual final production actually got used because your
Right.
vocal performance was so
Was
much better.
so good that it was worth, yeah,
It was worth actually having some of the imperfection.
right.
So what we call, like, happy accidents.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh, yeah, that actually," and people think, "Oh, you really designed that." I said, "No, that was kinda like that wasn't the point."
That
But
wasn't
like,
the point at all, but
yeah,
we'll
but
take
it
it.
ended up
Yeah,
being the point.
right,
'Cause I think there was a
right.
funny thing where, like, Tom Petty, like, where he said, "Sometimes the losers get lucky sometime." That
Yeah.
was like a last minute thing that he didn't know what the lyrics should be. And
So he
they're just
just
rolling the tape, and he just came up with that, and they've been in the band said, "Oh, that's brilliant." It's like, "Well, how long did you have that?" I said, "I just made it up.
yeah, I don't know, it came out of my mouth. Yeah.
It just came out, and then that's it." It's like, "Well, that's the one we keep."
Well, and that happens, I think, sometimes as an author, as I'm writing, is I'll write something and I'll look at it and I'll think, wow, where did that come from? Because I don't feel like, I don't know. I don't know where these things come from. There's obviously, the right side, left side of the brain, and they don't always talk to each other because I sometimes am reading what I'm typing and I think, wow,
Yeah, where'd that come from?
as though I didn't just put it out on the page, right? It's very, I don't know. It's a crazy state that you get into, that you're
Yeah.
tapping into something that you don't, it's that subconscious part. We don't tap into it all day, every day.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan was asked a long time ago, like, he was asked, I think, on somebody on 60 Minutes, asked him about some of his, like, late '60s work, and he said, "Well, I can't even get myself into that state anymore. I can't I write differently, so I write different now,
Yeah.
but I can't even get myself to be in the place where I wrote some of his biggest hits." He said, I have no idea how I can't get myself back there." And I just let it go because, like, I can't do it, so I'm not gonna worry about it. But it was like he's like and the people was like, "Whoa, you're so literally like, you can't do that." It's like, "No, I do something different now,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I can't get to that." And so what that kinda shows you the point in time nature of art, you know?
Yeah. I you try to explain that concept to someone who is not a creative, and they look at you like maybe you need medication.
Yeah, they can't figure it
You
out. So why can't
no,
you do that? How come it's not repeatable? And like, well, that's not.
it's just, yeah, I don't know. And I went to a book club not too long ago. Someone had read the book, and so we were having this discussion, and one of the ladies said, "Let me read something that you wrote." She's reading it. First of all, as an author, there is nothing better than someone saying, "This piece touched me," and then reading it out loud, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it was
it
just
makes
like,
you feel
wow,
good.
right? So my mind is thinking, wow, I wrote that. That does sound pretty good.
That's
And then
pretty
she
good.
says, "What were you thinking when you wrote this?" And I'm like,
Oh, I don't know.
I have no idea.
I
I
have no
didn't even
idea.
know I wrote it, right?
Sometimes I'm in a zone. It's like I can't
Yeah.
even remember if I did a performance like on stage and somebody asked me like, "Do you know what you were doing?" I was like, and then they show me the tape. It's like I don't know. I was in the
No.
zone. I don't even know
Yeah.
that I was there.
Yeah.
But, like I
Yeah.
kind of got there, and then they show me it, and I was like, "Wow,
Wow,
I
I did
can't
pretty
I
good,
can't
huh?
explain to you what that is
Yeah.
because it's just what it is."
Right. It's you do get into, for performers, you get into that performing zone. For people who are doing the creative part, you get into that creative zone. And during that time, you're really not your everyday you
Yeah.
at that moment. You're I don't know, it's like you're channeling
Like
something
like the
else.
muse. The idea
Yeah.
that you could channel the muse like the Victorians is like, yeah,
Yeah.
I can call in the muse like, Blake and Wordsworth and
Right.
Tennyson, all Longfellow, all those guys are talking about it. And I really I get into it because I love like William Blake's songs of innocence and experience and his short form. Of all
Yes.
the Victorians, like he had the shortest form and he could get to the point.
Right.
Not that I don't like the other
Victorian
guys.
literature is not typically short form.
Yeah, and he's very short form.
Right.
And I'm like he can get to it in an abbreviated form, and it's just as beautiful as any of the other stuff. And I was always kind of spoke to me because it was more. It's like songwriting.
Right.
His poetry kind of links to songwriting because it's more simplistic, but still has layers to it.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I was always really pulled in by that. The
Absolutely.
fact that
Yeah.
you can be that way, that when
Yeah.
somebody can be, it's a style. It's like different people's styles that can speak to you. Like as a writer, like who spoke to you?
You know, People ask me that question, and I always feel really bad that I don't have anyone in particular. I'm an avid reader.
Yeah, wow.
I read 6 to 8 books a month. My favorite book is probably the last one I just read. I mean, I'm that kind of person. And so I just think that I take in a lot of, I don't know, I'll see things and I'll think, now that was a good phrase.
Mhm,
Wow, I liked the way, or I liked how, as I'm reading, the author is taking me down this path, and then all of a sudden we're over on another path. You
yeah,
know,
they kinda
like
switch.
and then when I stop and think about it, I realize I took myself down that path. That's where the author wanted me to go, but he's been leaving me all these tidbits the whole way,
Yeah,
right?
little
And
breadcrumbs, little,
yeah,
like, sweet
and
things.
I was ignoring them because I'm so busy going down my path. And so I think that I like, whenever I see something super creative, a way that something was explained or whatever. One of the books that I read recently that I just loved the way the author turned the phrase was, it was A Gentleman in Moscow was
Mhm,
the book, and he just had some beautiful phrasing.
mhm,
Just like, I loved the phrasing that he just sounded eloquent, and I liked that. And then realized that's not my style. Like, I can't do what he did, and that's
mhm,
okay, but I love to recognize other people's stuff. I also like to look at what isn't working. So
yeah,
it makes it I love to read, but now that I'm an author, my reading, if I want to read just for pleasure, I have to read something and like tell myself, you're just reading.
mhm.
Otherwise, I'm dissecting. I'm reading going, "Ooh, look at what they did there." You
Yeah.
Do you feel that way about music? Like, do
Yeah,
you
I
you
get really Well, music come I tend to get pulled in a lot of different directions. 'Cause I'm a
Yeah.
child of the '70s, but I love jazz, I love
Yeah.
punk, I
Yeah.
love, you know, psychedelic music, I like the synthesized what I call, like, expansive sound.
Mhm.
And so the idea of expansive sound is kinda like progressive rock where you can have timing changes, you can have, chord changes, you have tempo changes. Like a band like Yes, they have some parts of their songs that are funky. Some of their parts are classical.
Right.
Some parts are like rock. And I like it when bands can stretch like that
Yeah.
and are not just stuck in the blues. Not that I
Yeah.
don't love the blues. I love the blues. And I love
But
listening
but
to
but to be able to have a little more
yeah,
reach.
to
Yeah.
reach to pull to different areas like the
Yeah.
fusion jazz, which kind of
Yeah.
calls goes into all these goes into discordance, goes into dissonance, with like you can play with things that are off key. You
Yeah.
can play things that are off tempo and then come back to something that is in tempo. It's kind of complicated. It's not everybody's cup of tea. But when something has more color to it or complexity, like when you read something, it's not an obvious plot
Yeah.
and it's got like little subplots and little things that like Easter eggs in it, and then suddenly something that didn't seem like it meant something means something.
Means something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I like. I like
Yeah.
it's not so obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I enjoy that kind of thing too. Um, that idea of like the twists. I know for myself, I don't like to be put in a genre basket.
Hmm.
Like I've written 3 books that all 3 actually fall into historical fiction, but I don't consider myself a historical fiction author
Hmm.
because I've just written a book that will come out in February, and it's about our ride across the United States, lessons that I learned while riding across the United States. It's called 10 Little Rules for a Double-Butted Adventure. And that's, of course, not historical fiction. I'm writing a manuscript right now that is a contemporary humor about a woman who's going through menopause. And it's a funny tongue in cheek. And um, I also have a children's story that I'm writing. Like, I don't like the idea that because I wrote a historical fiction, I am now a historical
Oh,
fiction
yeah,
author.
you don't like getting pigeonholed. And
No, I
that's why a
tell
lot of people, they wanna be able to market you.
yes,
Like,
and
your agents is like, "I want this. What are you? You're" like, today, everything's like, "Oh, you're EDM." It's like, "No, no, I'm not EDM."
yeah,
Like, "I'm an experimental musician." "Oh, I can't sell that." So they wanna put you into trance
they
or even
do, and I
and I'm like, "Why
understand from a
I
marketing
understand that."
perspective. I do get from a marketing perspective that it would be a whole lot easier if I were a historical fiction author, and that's how they could market me. But what I've started marketing myself out as is a character-driven fiction author. So
That's a better way of doing it.
if you love characters, then you'll love to read my books. It won't matter where I set them.
Yeah, if you like somebody that's like, "Well, I'm on the like, I don't know, it's like, I like to work with analog kind of, musician focused, instrument focused music." And the
Yeah,
reason you would kind of say that is because today there's a lot of machine and sample based music.
yeah,
And people who say they're musicians and they're actually producers that move things around on a grid. And then those and you can say you were trained in music theory and that's why you can do that.
right.
But like it's not the same as if you actually sit down on your piano and actually play the chords out.
Exactly. Exactly. There is a difference. Well, it's kind of in a lot of ways the same thing with, AI is coming in, and there are people who write entire books by, using
Prompt
AI,
engineering.
and
Prompt engineering.
yeah, and it's like, okay, yes, it is a book, but it's not the same thing as if I sat down and wrote one.
But it feels like it's like a lot of times my daughter is a graphic artist,
Mhm.
and there's all these AI graphic artists that say
Yeah.
through their prompt engineering, they can equal a trained graphic artist, and the graphic artists are kinda screaming like, "No."
Right. Right, right.
It's like, if go into a gallery and look at art, like, do some art history, and then look at the AI generated prompt art, and do a real comparison,
Yeah.
and you'll
Yeah.
see what's missing is the soul, is the heart, is the human
Exactly.
voice.
Exactly.
And so the people who aren't artists, they can look at it and say, "Well, it looks like art to you." It's like, "Well, you're not really a professional critique of art. You never took art
Right.
history. You haven't done the work." So it looks like it's basically like junk food, fast food
Yeah,
art.
yeah. It's like saying that one of those frozen 99-cent burritos is the same thing as going into Mexico and getting a
You know, off
real.
the street, yeah,
Yeah,
getting it from a street vendor or a taco or a truck,
exactly.
a food truck.
Exactly.
It's like you could go all over Los Angeles and find food trucks, and it'll be better than anything you find in the freezer aisle.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's that same kind of thing is yes, does it pass, like under very little
Basic test.
scrutiny? Well, yeah, I guess it could, but in terms of, is it real art? Is
Yeah,
it really pulling you in? Is it doing all of those things? I think the answer is going to be no for music, for graphic arts, for
everything.
books, for
Yeah,
all of those that yes, it can pass the way fast food passes, but that doesn't mean fast food has yet to take Mama's Kitchen out,
well, the whole thing
right?
I try to tell people is like the tech bros
Yeah,
want you to believe that
yeah,
because guess
yeah,
what? They make money off the tokens. Like the whole way AI works is
right,
every time you use those tokens, they get paid for that.
right,
So they want to transfer your money from you buying songwriters' work and paying them their royalty to
right,
them getting the royalty.
right, right.
So it's like
And
OpenAI wants
you
the
can't
royalty
blame them,
versus the songwriter, and I
right,
understand why they're doing it because I'm in tech,
right, right.
but like I don't buy it. It's like I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to tell everybody. And I had some tech bro tell me that people will want to listen to AI artists instead of real artists, and I was like, I understand why you're saying that,
Yeah, but
but
I
that's
don't
in
think
your own economic interest to say what you're saying.
yeah, and I don't think it's true. I think that you know th- there may be some people who do, but I think most people recognize real art. Maybe they can't afford it to put it on their wall and they'll buy something
Yeah,
cheap, but in terms of what they want to pay money, real money to go see or to view or to whatever, they want real artists. They
yeah, they
want
want
real
to see
authors. They
somebody
want,
like an
yeah,
actor, like
yeah,
if I go to New York and I see like a off Broadway play, and I see somebody doing Death of a Salesman, I see them doing that act, how the actor every night is reinterpreting that character, and I
right,
can actually see it 2 nights in a row, and it's being done differently every night,
right.
and that's why I go to see.
Exactly, to
Yeah,
see what was different. Just,
yeah, if I go
yeah,
see a band like Pearl Jam, they're kind of famous for Eddie Vedder, people will go see Pearl Jam 2 nights in a row because he reinterprets his lyrics and how he performs them every
yeah,
night,
every night. Yeah,
and
yeah,
so, even Dylan used to do that. He used to go do in the '70s different versions of like Tangled Up in Blue and Idiot when we actually had different sets of lyrics.
yeah,
And when you would see one performance, he would run one set. And then when you saw another performance, he would do a variation of the story.
right,
And that's why I'd like to go see it because like Dylan thought it was fun to do that,
right.
to actually
Well,
change the story.
and even when they don't change the lyrics, I've noticed that live performance music never sounds like the album music.
Oh, yeah.
There
Unless you're the
because
Eagles.
right. I mean, there's all kinds of things that change. The tempo will change, and the riffs will change, and the solos. They'll pass it off for someone to do a drum solo
Yeah,
or
because
a
it's more
you know
fun for the artist. And like if you
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And so
there was a funny story about the Eagles where, like, Dylan Fry, and, I always forget the drummer's name, but they actually like, they were the leaders of the band, and they started finding the band if they didn't play note for note Hotel California the way the single was written. And
oh
Joe
wow,
Walsh is like, "Why would you do that to me?"
right,
Because I'm a lead guitar player, and, like, I don't wanna play that solo the way I wrote it.
right.
It's not fun for me.
Right. The solo was a solo at the time that was fun, and now I want to make it fun every time I play it, which is a
Yeah,
little
to just
different,
make it
right?
match the single because you think that's what the audience wants,
Yeah, and I
I
don't think
don't
that's
think that's
true. I
what the
think
audience wants.
no, I think the audience loves the fact that there was that variation, that they can pinpoint and say that's the variation that I heard, or
That's the
yeah,
problem with the AI tools today. What we call in the box is you'll see bands that are actually playing their single exactly the way it is on the radio
yeah,
because they're actually locked into their master recording, and when they go on stage, they're locked into their tracks,
yeah, and that's
and
all
so
they
they
can.
only have so much room to move,
Right,
and have
right,
kind of limited themselves with the machine. And I
right.
always look, it's like you shouldn't do that. Like turn off the machine and just play it live.
Just play it. Do it live, because even if there's a little mistake or a little, like, the audience doesn't care about that.
No, they want to see you
They're
interpret.
there live, right?
Yeah, they
That's what they
wanna
want
see
to
you
see.
interpret it. Like,
Yeah,
even if you, like, read your book at a like, you go to a like, a convention, you read
yeah,
passages from your book. I mean, I think fans wanna see the author actually read passages
yeah,
or
yeah.
have a conversation where you're talking about your characters.
They do. And
And, depending how
that's
you
one of
feel,
the
you might say
r
it one way one day and one
exactly.
way the other day.
Exactly, because, like, how was I feeling about the character? Well, today
Yeah,
today I
today
don't
I
like
did.
Carrie Ann very much. Yesterday she was better. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like yeah, that interaction as a writer, like you can get a different story because one day you ask like Orson Welles about Citizen Kane with one interviewer, and then you ask him with a different interview, and he has a different
Right, right.
interpretation of what he meant. And it's like, well, that's what you want. That's where you want to get that different perspective based on like where their head's at.
I also think that it's really interesting. I remember as a kid, you're sitting in these English lit classes, and the teacher is proclaiming, well, what did the author mean when he put blue curtains in the scene? Well, now as an author, I think, well, he might have meant that to be symbolic, or he might have looked up and said, oh, I have blue curtains, I'm going to put blue curtains
I'm
in
just
this
gonna
scene.
do what's in my room. Yeah,
And sometimes I think it's what's crazy is the symbolism sneaks in without the author
it's subconscious. Yeah,
actively.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not actively doing that. When I wrote my first book, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, I mean, total novice. I was a complete, didn't know what I was doing. I mean, really just wrote the story. I'm working with my editor. She's given me some great ideas. I've gone back, I'm doing all of this. And then she says to me, we need to write the back cover blurb. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do this. And she says, well, think about the themes in the book. And I just looked at her so blankly, and it's like, themes?
Sometimes it's better to
Themes?
have somebody else pull that out.
Yeah, and I said, "Well, you tell me, what themes do you see?" Well, she starts throwing out these themes, and I'm like, "Wow, I did all of that."
I did, yeah. Well, sometimes it's good to have like an English professor go pull them out and then put it out
Yeah,
there. You
yeah,
know,
because yeah, I guess that I knew I was writing those themes, but that isn't what I was thinking. I
yeah, it's
had
hard.
this
It's hard. It's
I
hard
had
to
these
reinterpret
yeah,
it.
I had these characters. They had a story. My stories obviously have themes because that's the way stories are told, but I was not consciously saying, well, this is about family relationships and about women growth, and about, like, I wasn't doing that.
Yeah,
Right. And so when
yeah.
she told me the themes, I was like, whoa.
Well, I think there's a famous like film where they show like a fan coming up to John Lennon and he's trying to like tell him all, but he had all these interpretations of Lennon's work,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Lennon was like, I don't know, I didn't see it that way.
Well, yeah, and so I'll sit in these book clubs, and women will say, "Well, I thought that this represented such and so," and I'm thinking, "Wow, that's really a cool interpretation. I never thought that, but I can see how you got that from what
Yeah,
I
because
wrote."
like the fans end up owning the work.
Oh yeah,
And that's what a lot of times with musicians, like you can want to have a frame for what you thought your song was about. But at the end of the day, like once the fans have it, like they've got it.
they've
And
got
you
it
had
right.
your original idea, but like how they interpret it is like that's they kind of they own it now. And
Well,
you,
and really, different fans can have different interpretations, which is also fantastic.
yeah, I mean that's
You
what
know,
happens. And then sometimes if you show up and they start arguing with the creator and saying, "Well, why did you make the character do this? And why did you make them like hurt?
Right.
why you make them go through pain?" It's like, well, it's cool that you feeling that deeply about the character.
Yeah. But I was just telling this quick little story, and yeah.
Yeah, because you see how invested people get
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
work, and you're like, wow, like I didn't know that they felt. Well, it's cool that you can pull those emotions out of people. That's
It
kind of like
is.
what you're trying to do.
That's the thing that really makes being an author so fun for me, is when people say things like, "Oh, I cried. At the end, I just cried," or "I felt so bad for this character," or even, "Man, I was so angry with that one character that wouldn't do what they were supposed to do." And it was like, "Oh, good. I'm glad that you had feelings when you were reading it." That's the point. If you're going to read it and you're going to be happy and sad and angry and all of the things, isn't that fabulous? Like,
Yeah.
then I did a good job. Thank you.
Do you have stories that you have multiple parts to it? Like I know a lot of authors today try to do like trilogies.
Yeah.
They try
No,
to do series of books and keep characters going.
I
Or
get
you seem
bored.
like you've got different ideas and you want to
Yeah.
go into different projects and you
I
don't
get
want to
bored too fast. I'm
you
I'm one
know
of those people, and I've been that way my whole life. It's one of the reasons why when people say, like, "What are your hobbies?" I have trouble coming up with a list because they change all the time, because I get tired. It's like, "Yeah, that was fun for a while. I'm done with that."
you move
Um,
to the next thing, yeah.
I moved on to something else. I feel that way with my books. I wrap up the end enough that I don't feel there's a need for more. And
Mhm.
then I put those characters away because I have new characters that I've been shoving into another room in my head for weeks because they're
Mhm.
trying to get out, and I'm like, "I have to finish this first.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you sit there and be quiet until I can get this one done." I get it done, and that next character is like, "Here I am."
That's
You
cool
know?
because I think that some people like to get well, I don't know, some artists they get into a trap where they're locked into their own mythology.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they're kinda locked into that, like, they gotta keep on putting out in the world this character over and over in
And
different
over and
ways.
over. And for some people it really works and they do a great job with it. I've been asked for each one of my books, "Are you gonna do a series?" Because the readers have
They
enjoyed
want
the
that.
character enough that they would
They
do it
want
again. But as the author, I'm like, "Yeah, you wouldn't like the series because I don't have anything else to say about that character.
Yeah, you've got a
I'm
complete
done."
thought. It's kinda like if you look at Bowie, Bowie never repeated Ziggy,
Yeah.
right? He ended up because like Thin White Duke, and then he came up with Aladdin Sane because he just would like and he said, like, "I coulda kept Ziggy going through the whole '70s. Through
Right.
the entire '70s, he coulda just been Ziggy." And he said, "That's boring."
Right.
Because I had
Right.
other ideas, theatrical ideas, and I didn't wanna just be locked into that. So I killed
Yeah.
Ziggy,
Yeah.
and then I did something else.
Right. Well, and that's the way I feel, especially, like I said, being locked into a genre, being locked into um pretty much a character, being locked into how I write my characters. Um I've done a straight through where the book just follows through. I've done flashbacks. I've done dual timeline. I like just, I don't know, telling the story in whatever way it comes to me that this story needs to be told.
Yeah,
And
you
and
have a beginning, middle, and you got an end, and you don't
yeah, and
wanna keep it
however
going.
that comes out, does it need to be one character? Does it need to be more than one point of view? Well, it's going to depend on the story. I don't want someone to say this is how it has to be done. I also don't like to be locked into, for instance, I have several friends that write every day, and they get up in the morning, they have a little routine, they sit down and they write for 3 or 4 hours. Oh, no. Like, I don't like feeling trapped. And some of that, I wonder, is because I was in that abusive relationship for
Mm,
14 years
yeah, you don't wanna be
where
in that.
I was pretty much told what to do, when to do, how to do it.
Mm,
And I decided when I got out of that relationship, when I finally was able to get out, that never again was I going to be that unhappy. And never again was I going to let someone else dictate to me my life, that I got to make my own choices. And so some of it, I think, is a little bit of a pushback, oh, I have to write every day. Watch me not do that.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Nobody
know?
would want to be restricted by your own
Yeah.
success, because that's what
Yeah.
happens. Like a lot of times, you get on the train and it's like your management is like, "Oh, let's do this, do that single again, right?
Again and
Do that
again
theme
and
again,
again. Yeah.
do it again," and that's what the industry loves to do. Like in the
Oh, yeah.
music industry, they just want you to keep on doing Purple Rain over and over and
Right.
over
Makes
until
it
they,
easy to market.
yeah, because that's what they want. And then the Prince will give them around the world in a day, and it's like, what's that? What That's not Purple Rain. It's like, because that's not where I say I'm not in a Purple Rain mood, and they hate that because you go from like 8 million down to 1 million,
Right.
and then they're like, well, why'd you do that? It's like, well, because like it's not about trying to make the 8 million. It's like happened to be that song made the 8 million, and that's fine.
Right.
But like I didn't do it for that. I
That
did
wasn't
it
the
because,
purpose of the song, and I don't
yeah,
want to keep trying to repeat the same thing over and over. Yeah,
just trying to tell the story, and if it appeals to people where suddenly you get this mass appeal,
yeah,
when not every idea is going to have a mass appeal.
exactly. And will I ever write a series? I could. You never know. I might end up with a book that is so big and so long and so detailed that I can see that this would be better broken into 2 or 3.
It serves your ideas. Like if you
Yeah.
like that, that's where you come up with an idea. Like, why are you going to do a rock opera? Well, if one
Yeah.
song kind of demands that it needs to be a rock opera,
Yeah.
then I would go into a rock opera.
Right.
If it this needs to be one song and it's not going to have other songs tied to it, then that's what it's going to be. It's
Right.
kind of whatever serves the project.
Right. That's the way I feel, especially, like I said, with the genre idea. I'm writing a first person present tense comedic type piece, which is so not what I've written before. But this character jumped in my head, and she had a funny voice and kind of a little bit of sarcasm, and I just really
Went with it.
bonded with her, and I thought that she needs to be written. Well, she can't be written historical fiction. This
Yeah.
character is not historic at all. This character is almost me and my friends and people that I know, and I've like, it needs to be now, and it needs to be
Well, you give yourself
2024
the
humor,
permission
right?
to reframe based on
Yeah.
what the story needs,
Yeah.
versus like trying to force it into a. Sometimes there's a formula,
Yes.
like they
Yeah.
like the blues is the pentatonic scale, right? And you can be locked into the blues, and that's the blues. But
Right.
if suddenly you turn it and it's like, well, this is going to be cosmic blues, like Graham Parsons, or
Yeah.
cosmic country,
Yeah.
then suddenly it's not roots country.
Right.
It's
It's something different.
it's
Yeah.
something different. It's something like
Yeah.
goes off into this other place. It's like, well, that's not the formula. Well, that's the point.
That's the yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes it demands that you have this voice telling you it needs to get reframed. It doesn't need to be in this house. It needs to have a whole new house.
Yeah, build its own house. I've noticed that that's one of the things that's a little difficult for me is I don't tend to write a book with a genre in mind. I write my book. And then my publishing house says, "So, what genre are we putting it in?" And I sit and look over the list and
And
say,
find it.
"Well, I
Like,
think
where is
I could fit here and maybe here." you know,
yeah,
because I didn't sit down with
targeted.
the formula. For instance, and not bashing formula books because a lot of people read them and enjoy them, but
Mhm.
romance, for instance, has a very, very specific
Specific
formula. And
structure, yeah.
romance readers, those people who pick up a romance, don't want you to change that formula. That's what
That's
they're
what they live
looking for,
in.
right? And that's what they want. And that's fine, but I'm probably not ever going to write it
Yeah,
unless
you
a
know who you are.
story that right, unless a story that I have in my head naturally fits that,
Yeah, if what you writing suddenly falls into that and
then
you feel
that would be
cool about it,
fine.
then it's like, and it's flowing, it's like, yeah, then I'll flow that way. But
Yes,
if
yeah,
it
then
doesn't
if it
follow
doesn't,
it,
it just doesn't. Yeah,
yeah,
and
and
so
that's why I think people try to just gyrate into the square peg in a round
yeah,
hole.
yeah, yeah, and I'm, like I said, I don't like people dictating to me who I am and what I write. And
Yeah.
I've talked with a lot of indie authors over the last year, and it's interesting the number of people who feel like I do. So I think it's more the industry that is pushing authors to become something, whereas
Bunch of
authors are kind of,
algorithms. Like we're living in an algorithm
and
world.
authors are saying, oh wait, no, like I just read a book the other day, and it was like an FBI thriller with a paranormal twist. Like, how crazy is that? Because you don't think FBI and paranormal would ever fit together, and it worked. It was a really cool twist. And I think I like that when an author is willing to say, this is what I'm going to try. I'm going to do something that is very much like the FBI thriller that all people are used to, and I'm going to throw a little something else in,
Yeah. That's why I like the cross genre, and I watch a lot of Eastern stuff. I mean, I go into a lot of K dramas, a lot of Chinese dramas, even some anime and manga, just because the different perspectives. I was watching this one thing where it was mixing horror with sci-fi, and then like teenage romance. So it's teenage romance, horror, sci-fi,
sci-fi,
and then Shintoism all in one thing. No, it was coming from all these different angles and very stylized and didn't look like anything else. And I said, well, this artist is actually trying to build something
new,
unique.
something that was in them.
Yeah. And it was like they had a voice and they had a vision, and they weren't trying to replicate whatever the popular thing was, because it doesn't match what's in the top 10.
Right.
And I always get drawn into people who are more willing to kind of do that, because that's what I find interesting, because it's like if I want to read the top 10 list every day, that's I guess what my goal is. But for my deal is like I go to the bottom 500 of the underground and see what's going on there.
What's going down there? Well,
That's
and
where the cool stuff's happening.
Right. And I've told people that, would I love to be on the New York Times bestsellers list? Well, I'm not saying I wouldn't, because let me tell you, because once you're there, then you become known, and then you can start doing what you want, and you've got a following, right? So I'm not knocking that. But the truth is if that's all you ever read, you are missing out on a heck of a lot of good stuff out there, because what it comes up on these high-ranking best lists pretty much are the same books over and over and over, and it's the flavor of the month, whatever is big and in right now, and that's what you're going to see, and you're going to read a lot of that until the flavor changes, and then you're going to read a lot of that. Whereas if you look at books that aren't making those lists, they're not making lists because they're not the flavor of the month, whatever that is, whatever those big companies are looking for, right? And you get some really cool, awesome work. Okay, I'm not knocking it. I'll be on the list. Let me be on the list, right?
It's cool to be on the list, if you could be the cutting edge, like the way I look at it is like the Jim Morrison that gets on the list. The Hendrix that gets on the list.
Right. Because I mean, I would love to be on the list.
They changed the genre.
Right. I would love to be on the list because they looked at my stuff and said, wow. And then now everyone tries to copy it. Wouldn't that be fabulous?
Well, that's what you want to be, is like the way, the Beatles weren't like everybody else.
Right.
And everybody kind of cloned them after fact.
Right.
But the fact is, like, they actually became from a teen band to actually being an artistic band.
Right.
Which is like a teeny bopper band, but it becomes artistic. We're like, wow. How does that happen?
How does that happen? Yeah.
Well, it happened because you actually let them become artists.
You let them become who they were.
Telling them to stay in the teeny bopper help phase.
Right.
You get to Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album and Abbey Road.
Right. Exactly.
Because you let them actually
evolve. You let them evolve and become. Which is one of the reasons why when people say to me, like, who's your favorite author? It's like, oh, what a hard question, because authors evolve. And I have read some authors that I really loved their early work, and I didn't really care for their later stuff because they evolved in a way that no longer fit what I needed as a reader. And there are other authors that I didn't like their early stuff, but I really liked some of their later things. And there are some authors where I like one of their books.
One of their pieces, yeah.
But not their others.
Yeah, not
Right.
everybody's like always hitting it. Not
Right.
everybody's always hitting it all 8 cylinders, you know? And
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and
sometimes
not
they
only
don't.
that, but as a consumer of art, you're looking for something that's touching you, and where you are changes.
Yeah. Yeah, you may
So
not be in
like
the same place, yeah, that
right.
they
So
are.
like as a 20-year-old, when I was reading certain authors and enjoyed them, what if I went right now and read those very same books that I enjoyed?
Yeah.
Would I enjoy them now? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, Rick One
Because
Time, I remember I read that, and it still speaks to me, but
right,
it was like it was just something about it, and I'm like, "Oh, that's it."
at that moment, right? Because I think that's what happens is, like music will touch you that way, books will touch you that way, art on the wall will touch you that way, where you'll walk and you'll see a piece and think, oh my gosh, isn't that absolutely gorgeous? But will it be gorgeous 20 years from now? Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe
your
not. It
taste
depends
changes,
on,
yeah. Yeah, it
yeah.
depends on where you are, because like, you could be I was into MC5 in 1974, and like, now it's like, "Oh, I can't listen to it now."
Right, right. And does it mean that it's good or bad? It doesn't mean anything other than where you were at that time, that music touched you.
Yeah. Yeah, because
And it
it's all
and it
so phases, like whatever
yeah,
phase you're in. It's like frequency. I always say it's like you either like you're resonating with some frequency and then
yeah,
you're like in sync with it and you're in tune with it or you're
right.
not.
Or you're not. Right.
And that's very time dependent.
It is very time dependent. And I think that's something that authors need to understand is your book isn't going to touch everyone, and that's okay.
Mhm.
I
I
tell people all the time, don't read a book you're not enjoying. If you don't enjoy it, put it down, find another one. There's billions of books out there. Find the one that,
give
that
somebody else a
suits you,
shot. You give me else
right?
somebody else a shot.
Yeah. Yeah. If you didn't like mine, that's fine. Move on.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like put it back so someone else can pick it up, because not everything I've read books that I know other people have thoroughly enjoyed and I could not get into. But it doesn't mean it was a bad book. It means that it wasn't the right book for me at the
Wasn't
time.
speaking to you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what people that's the best you can do is just I think that when people are kind of honest and 'cause I think people are kind of driven to like because of the culture, it's like, "Oh, everybody should like this."
Yeah.
And then you feel like, "Well, I should like it too." Then you check it
I
out, it's
should
like,
like it. Yeah. But
Well, I
if you
don't."
don't, you don't.
And you
Move
don't not 'cause,
on.
like,
Yeah.
it just means that popular culture is kinda like bullying people into, like,
Yeah, I think so too.
this
Yeah.
is the thing, this is the thing," and then it's like, "Well, that cat video doesn't speak to me."
Yeah.
Everybody
Sorry.
says it should speak to me, but it doesn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Well, and I have read several books that are like the big, everyone's talking about them books, and some of them I've enjoyed and some of them I have not at all. And
Yeah.
it's okay. It's okay. Like I said, there's thousands, millions of books out there. Go find one that speaks to you. So,
Well, I want everybody to check out your website,
thank you.
terrymbrown.com, and as I said, that's fully clickable. Check out all of the books that you have linked up there, and, I wanna thank you again for being a guest on the Family Like It Goes podcast. It always goes by quicker than we ever imagined,
I can't
the
believe
hour.
the hour's already gone.
But, yeah, I just wanna, thank you for taking your time on a Saturday to talk to me, and, I appreciate it, and I hope everybody found this interview instructive about about the whole process of writing and to kinda have an in-depth vision from an author, which is what we try to give people, that kind of picture, a view into your, creative person's, life, and I do thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, have a great rest of the day.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much for being on the show.